In the last video, we looked at the Missouri Compromise. We looked at how it totally negated the Missouri Compromise of 1820. We looked at, in the Compromise of 1850, what the South got: the Fugitive Slave Act, popular sovereignty, that Congress had no influence on how slaves were traded and sold between the states. The government had no control over that. And that the North got California as a free state and a ban of slave trade in Washington, D.C. And then we discussed a little bit about how Harriet Beecher Stowe took the life of slavery and made it tangible, where people could relate. She wrote stories about Uncle Tom and the slave owner, and people could really identify, and it brought slavery to life. It is like, what this did was the same thing as if somebody says, oh, I have a cousin who was killed in the Middle East. And you go, yeah, sorry to hear that, and you feel bad. Or if you knew the cousin, all of a sudden the killings in the Middle East become very real and important to you. And that's what Uncle Tom's Cabin did. Now, the tension about slavery in the country is increasing. The South hated her, they hated the book, they said it was propaganda. The North became more and more anti-slavery. They were appalled at the slave conditions. The Southerners were seeing slavery as an issue of personal and states' rights, that the government really should not interfere. The government, when they saw slaves as property, they saw them as property that's no different than you own a horse, you own a table, you own a bed. The government doesn't tell you how to regulate your bed, if you can bring your bed when you move to a new territory with you. It is your property, it is your bed. That's how the Southerners saw it. They saw the slaves as property. So they had rights to do with their slaves whatever they wanted. The Kansas-Nebraska Act only increases tensions because now, you know, these areas are going to be decided on by popular sovereignty, where the people who move there decide and vote. Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854. Kansas and Nebraska territories, slavery is going to be decided by popular sovereignty. And this again will undo the Missouri Compromise of 1820. We've already talked about that. Now, people start moving into these territories. You have a lot of people who are pro-slavery moving in. You have a lot of people who are anti-slavery coming to move in because they want to stop the spread of slavery. So you have these two very strongly conflicting groups moving into the same territory. So what happens then? Pro-slavery forces and anti-slavery forces pour into those territories. They want to make sure slavery doesn't spread, or slavery does spread. The South was saying, you don't infringe on my rights of my private property. The North is saying, this is a moral issue. You can't treat people that way. So what happens when you have two different groups living in close contact with each other? What is the inevitable? Violence. And there were bands of pro-slavery and anti-slavery groups that were attacking the opposite. If they had a farm and they were pro-slavery and their neighbor was anti-slavery, they would go and attack the neighbor, and there were fights and people got killed. The whole idea of, this is our property, this is for the South, this is a moral wrong for the North. So now violence is happening, and people are being killed in these territories. So elections were held, but the results were corrupt. Pro-slavery and anti-slavery groups, because they did the election to see if Kansas would be a slave territory or, by popular sovereignty, a free. Pro-slavery and anti-slavery groups were armed, attacking each other, settlers are killed. Fighting even impacts the Senate. Massachusetts governor was giving an anti-slavery speech. The nephew of a Southern senator, as the governor was giving his speech, takes his cane, marches onto the Senate floor, and starts beating the Massachusetts governor. And the Massachusetts governor never really recovers from his injuries. So the violence and the tension and the animosity and the hatred is growing leaps and bounds. And the more people are hurt and the more fighting there is, the more anger there is. Then you have the Dred Scott decision of 1857. Dred Scott was a slave and went to the Supreme Court, and he said, listen, legally I am free. And why did he say that? Because he was living in an area where slavery was illegal. And so he said, I cannot live here under my master and be a slave, because that's against the law here. So while we are here, I am free. The court decides Scott is not free. And the court says so for two reasons. Scott had no right to sue for his freedom because he wasn't a legal citizen. And that is Dred Scott. Number two, so he had no legal right to pursue this in the court system. Slaves are property, whether you live in a slave state or a free state. In other words, a slave is no different than a table. That table will always be the property of the owner, whether the owner lives in a slave state or a free state. So this was a win, huge win for the Southern or pro-slavery camp. The North, including Abraham Lincoln, hated the ruling. The South obviously loved it. And so Lincoln decides to run for the presidency in 1860. Lincoln says, the South says, if Lincoln gets elected because he opposed the Dred Scott decision and opposed the spread of slavery, the Southern states will leave the Union. They will get out. Lincoln runs for president, and he is running against someone else who is a Northerner, Stephen Douglas. Lincoln is against popular sovereignty. He saw what was happening in Bleeding, Kansas, where both groups tried to get a lot of people to move in there to have their side win. And he said, I'm against it, it's wrong. And he is against the spread of slavery. He is not necessarily wanting to abolish slavery. He just wanted to contain it, not allow it to spread anymore. And the Southerners see Lincoln as against them, hateful to their lifestyle, and an abolitionist. That Lincoln wants to destroy their way of life. Stephen Douglas, he is for popular sovereignty. He wants each area to decide for themselves. That is their right. Lincoln is elected. South Carolina secedes from the Union of the United States, and the war begins. We will look at what happened with the war, how it was fought, in the next videos.